What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. Again, I'm your host, Maddie Hudak, and I have some fun, finally new Tulane football news to break down. We're still getting towards spring camp, although February being the truncated month that it is, suddenly March 12th is coming sooner than expected. And there's been people that have reached out to me asking about whether or not practices are open. I will try and find that out, and I'm sure that information will come out and that there will be at least one or a few open practices, if not the spring game, because I recall it being like that last year. But again, as I've kind of talked about on the last couple of weeks of the show, this is a very bizarre period where there's literally no football happening. And so what can you cover exactly? And I've been going back and forth. I really enjoyed my interview with Jarius Monroe this last Friday episode. It was really just so great to highlight how these guys really shine in terms of their character, their attitude towards the draft process, towards the openness to being a versatile team player and being an player, being that you're great on the field and great off the field, something that we talked about in that conversation. Also learning that he's a cat person, because he reminds us a lot of kind of a golden retriever, just being super happy all the time. So the cat thing was funny. All that to say, I'm going to be kind of going back and forth, especially as Tulane's Pro Day is coming up, but with that kind of coinciding with this new era of Tulane football, it was really exciting to be able to hear from some new faces in the program that we haven't yet seen take the field or take the podium for that matter. Transfers wide receiver Mario Williams and quarterback Ty Thompson both spoke to the media today. Ty Thompson coming over from Oregon, Mario Williams coming over from USC. And it was just really interesting. You know, I go to these press conferences, but as the broadcast crew, we don't really ask them questions, but just kind of seeing how they interact, it really just stuck out to me, the human element throughout the entirety of this process for these guys that enter the transfer portal, come to these new environments, and just how big of a decision that is and how many factors weigh into that. You know, there's all this conversation going on in college football right now about NIL and the future of college athletics. And I can't really say one way or another what is and isn't up in the air, and it is very much the wild west, and things are eventually going to come to a head. But for a lot of guys that are looking to the draft, they're looking to better themselves, to chase the dream of loving football again, that was something that really stuck out in especially what Ty Thompson was talking about. But if you recall back to the episode I did on John Summerall's press conference about signing day, I remember him making a comment about NIL and how if it's the second thing that comes out of a guy's mouth, that he's not really interested in carrying on that conversation. I mean, he goes on to say, with the caveat that NIL is a necessary thing and that adapt or die type mentality. But what he's really getting at is there are guys that are just kind of in it for the paycheck. And I think when you're building what they're doing over here at Tulane and building off of the success and the legacy that was left behind by the previous teams, by the previous coaching staff, these new guys really want to come in and make their mark, and just what they find important about that, the relationships that they highlighted with the coaching staff. And they've really only been here for a few weeks, and no installs or anything is really taking place until spring. And so for both of them to have such strong feelings and that being one of their primary reasons for choosing this program, not just Coach Summerall, but Colin D'Angelo, one of the offensive analysts, he was someone that recruited Mario Williams out of high school. I'll get more into this on this episode, but both of them mentioned him by name, both of them mentioning Coach Carter, Coach Craddock, who is the offensive coordinator, and just a lot about what John Summerall is building. But it really just stuck out to me again that these guys are humans first, players second. And it was really nice to see how well-spoken these guys were, especially Ty Thompson and his conversation and his candidness about being a leader and what that looks like to him. And I'm going to break all of that down on today's show. You know, it really just struck me going into this press conference. I had run into Sharif Ishaq with WDSU walking over to the bunker suite at Yeoman and just talking with him about the fact that these are some serious big names that we're going over to here at Tulane, and that a few seasons ago, you know, we're just not having this conversation where you did really see these guys that had no name, no brand behind them We can talk about the history of Tulane's brand as a football program, but just to be candid, the last couple of seasons, it's really been the success of these last two teams that have changed, I think, history and the future of Tulane football, both the coaching staff, but really the players. And that just really shone through talking with these guys today, even though I wasn't asking questions, just kind of sitting back, seeing how they are as people. And that human element really stuck out to me more than anything else throughout both Ty Thompson and Mario Williams speaking today, where I've gone to press conferences in the NFL. I've asked a question or two here and there. I don't necessarily ask them at Tulane just because I have the ability to talk with these guys in such, a more off the cuff manner. And oftentimes that's a lot more comfortable for them. But it just looking at kind of how I feel in those NFL press conferences versus the college ones, you could just tell that there's, and not a bad way, but a layer of professionalism and maybe separation. I'm trying to get it. It just feels a little clinical. And that's what happens when you're a professional. This is your day job, and you have to kind of answer for those things because this is your entire life. This is your profession. And with student athletes and with guys that are still growing up and finding their own in life and in football, it's a little different. And I think you see just that shine through a little more in the way that you could tell both of them were a little quieter and reserved starting out because they're coming over. They don't know us from Adam, and maybe they were just getting used to the media over at their previous program and coming over here. And you could tell every time they were asked questions about their previous programs, they were both trying very hard to just be classy and not speak of anything in an ill light. And I think it just speaks again to the character of the guys that Tulane is really seeking out to build this new program with. But you also just look at the caliber of the players that we're talking today, but how candid both of them were with not perhaps having the best production and here and there. And Mario Williams being the guy who fumbled out at the one at the Cotton Bowl, being on USC's team on that special teams blunder that led to the safety that led to the comeback. And he addressed it, but it's not something he really thinks about. It was an important game in that moment, but they lost. And so they don't think about it in the same way that Tulane people might. And I liked the way that he put that. But both of them just being very candid about what drew them to this program, both of them name dropping Colin D'Angelo, which I think is a really important thing to highlight on just how important he's been. He came over last season to work with the quarterbacks. Michael Pratt speaks so highly of him. He was one of the coaches I saw down in Mobile supporting Michael Pratt and Jaquan Jackson from that Tulane coaching staff. But both of them pointing out how he really played a hand in recruiting them over here. Mario Williams saying that Colin D'Angelo recruited him out of high school and he had that relationship with him already. And so when he entered the portal, it was just that natural, immediate connection. And then feeling the love and how much the coaches cared about them as people and how much they wanted everyone to care about one another. Both of those guys pointing those things out as something that drew them to Tulane. And it's not necessarily the end all be all in what makes a winning football program is a sense of brotherhood. But to me, I just point to psychology, relationships, that yes, this is a business, but it's all about people. And when these are younger guys that are going through things in life that are trying to find their best path to potentially getting drafted to their future in football and having all of this on their shoulders, trying to make the best decision for themselves and having this sense of agency now in a way that is not something you really have in the NFL. Yes, you could be an unrestricted free agent and have as much freedom as you want, but entering the transfer portal, it just really represents a fresh start, I think, for these guys. And that's what shone through this more than anything else. Again, we're living in a time where college football is a little bit of a mess right now. And some teams are feeling that a lot harder than others. And just kind of reading articles that come out here and there on what high schoolers think about NIL, hearing what coaches have to say about NIL, there being, just opinions across the board. But the fact of the matter is you can keep having opinions about something, but it exists and it's unavoidable. And so, as John Summerall said in his signing day press conference, adapt or die. Now, that being said, again, not pointing to NIL is really the end all be all. It's really hard to say, but knowing that Tulane still has the ability to compete in that era. And while that wasn't something that was really discussed today, you just have to get the sense that they're doing their job on that kind of compensation NIL standpoint. But as much as there might be opinions about whether or not players should have this much free choice. And I know with recent injunctions that it's kind of wide open for them, but hearing them both kind of just describing how much this fresh start means for them, particularly Ty Thompson, really appreciated everything that he had to say. And, without delving into too much about his time over at Oregon, just saying that he felt like some conversations might not have been as honest as he would have liked. And that was something that he really found here, and being candid about the fact that he kind of fell out of love with football because he was just so worried about the fact that his dream was right in front of him, and describing how for the last 3 seasons, he's just kind of been lying in wait. And that's a really difficult thing. I think that we don't talk about that enough, that there are guys that have to sit in that backup role. And particularly the last couple of years with that extra COVID year, it's something that I think a lot of guys are kind of done hurry up and waiting and just really want to get out there on the field and show what they have to do. And that was something Ty Thompson mentioned as well, that there were some programs where there was a senior back that was assuming the starting role, and that this was really a true wide open competition, and that he just really wants to prove that this is something that he can do, that he can lead. And talking about that leadership, I think back to my conversation with Jarius Monroe the other day, where he was talking about the fact that Tulane gave him the space to learn how to lead and be a leader at the same time in doing so. And I think that that really resonated with me when listening to what Ty Thompson said about leadership, and acknowledging that it's this unavoidable topic for quarterbacks, but that it's not really in his comfort zone. And he's more of a lead by example guy and less of a vocal one, with, again, an example of Jarius Monroe being that vocal leader. But really just talking about the fact that he knows that having to step out of his comfort zone and not be in that kind of ideal, comfortable situation is what's necessary in order for him to compete at this level. And noting the fact that having that emotional passion for what you're talking about, how much that makes it easier to lead, how much it makes it for guys to listen along with you, and being honest about the fact that he kind of had lost that passion up until he went to the Manning Passing Academy, which I found as a really interesting thing these last couple of years. And he credits the kids and the fact that they come there and their love for the game is just so pure and so innocent, and not wrapped up in all of these things that we're talking about in college football. And that's not even getting to the pressures of wanting to go on and be a draftable quarterback, but having that be the way that he fell in love with football again, it just really was very pure and very honest. And then the fact that he wants to, for lack of a better term, kind of repair how that relationship with football has gone through Tulane, I think just says a lot. Again, he pointed to Colin D'Angelo just as Mario Williams did. And the fact that he didn't know he was a quarterback when he recruited him at first, as I believe it was out of high school for him as well. But it was very easy to see once they started meeting that he just has so much insight and experience that he's able to bring to that position. But just pointing out John Summerall, pointing out Coach Craddock, pointing out the fact that the schemes here, they build them around what the players are good at and what they are designed around player strengths, rather than bringing over what worked at a different program. And I think that's extremely important when we talk about adaptability and guys wanting to come play for a program. And Ty Thompson saying that the first day they were just throwing routes, he felt like a kid in a candy shop because of just all of the talent bestowed to him at that wide receiver role. And you could just feel the hunger in the way that he spoke. But for being, again, this first time that we met with these guys, for as reserved as I think is to be expected, I think we saw a lot about just the human experience through how they spoke about prior situations, how they speak about Tulane, and what Tulane is really perceived as at this point, because both of these guys came from marquee programs. They were big names when they were both announced over here. That was, what's going on at Tulane kind of thing. Well, both of these guys have really said that the perception of this program, what they've been able to witness these last couple of seasons, Ty Thompson specifically pointing to Michael Pratt, mentioning that they spoke over the phone. They spent time at the Manning Passing Academy together, but he called Mike when he entered the portal and was looking at Tulane, and they had a very candid conversation that helped Ty Thompson in his decision-making. But being able to see that it doesn't matter if you're at the #1 program in the country, that Tulane is a school that you can go on and be seen as draftable and be seen as a successful path to being an NFL quarterback. So Michael Pratt's legacy has already really paid off in spades here, where people have picked up on the success of the last 2 years. They picked up on the fact that you can come here and be a playmaker. And this is a place that a lot of guys are choosing that fresh start to be at. And the transfer portal, I think it usually doesn't benefit G5 programs. And, we see more often than not, we saw this happen with Willie Fritz going over to Houston and just the general cycle of the portal and coaching. Some of these guys going on to SEC Power 5 level programs that Tulane now has to replace here. But the amount of talent that they brought in, I think it just really speaks to the perception of Tulane and the fact that whatever John Sumrall and this coaching staff is communicating to these incoming guys about the future of this program, it's sticking enough to get this caliber of names coming over and being this excited about playing at Tulane. And I just don't think that can be understated enough, where I think back to the last couple of episodes where 2 seasons ago, it just seemed like Tulane was the best kept secret that no one had really ever heard of, and feeling like this last season, they were finally starting to get the attention that they deserve. But there have been guys that have come out of Tulane, been successful in the NFL, but the national perception, the brand of Tulane hasn't really been the type that can attract this level and number of guys that we're seeing coming on in spades. And is it a chicken or an egg situation? Is it the success from Tulane's couple of seasons prior? Is it this new coaching staff and the success they had over at Troy? Because as much as we talk about Tulane's success here, that was all under a lot of different leaders, a lot of different players, and head coach Willie Fritz and his coaching staff. So the fact that John Sumrall did as well as he did at Troy and is bringing all these guys over, that all of them are name dropping and in multitude, but thinking about the fact that John Sumrall decided as well to keep some of the coaches from the previous coaching staff, and his anecdote about Rusty Witt, the new strength and conditioning coach, how when he came into Troy, he sat down with the leaders of the last couple of seasons, the players there, and asked them what needed to change and what needed to be kept around in order for this program to be successful, them all pointing out Rusty Witt. And although Sumrall was planning to bring in his own strength and conditioning coach, he listened to the players and talked with Rusty Witt, said that they were very, very similar as people, and just immediately went forward with that. And he kept several of the coaches from the previous regime. And you wouldn't really think about an offensive analyst all the time as being that valuable to your team. But Colin D'Angelo, his relationship building out of high school for both of these guys, really coming full circle, just shows how important that relationship is. And something else Mario Williams said, where I just want to pull it up here to make sure that I can see it, where if there was one thing he would go back and change in his college career, it would be building relationships and building trust with the coaching staff, and knowing them as people outside of being coaches, and that really matters when you're looking at how coachable you are, where when someone tells you to do something, just really wanting to do that for them, and pointing out that was something he palpably felt in the OC, Coach Craddock here, in John Sumrall, with Coach Carter as well, the wide receivers coach, everyone in this building. And that's really something that sticks out to me, where players are candid enough to admit that they don't feel like they had the opportunity or whatever it might be to build that in the past, to be able to have the self-reflection at this age, that it's something that you've been lacking and it's something you're seeking out and are able to see within Tulane's program. That was one of my really, really big takeaways, as well as just, again, the idea that Ty Thompson has been sitting lying in wait for 3 seasons at Oregon. He seems like he's just a steaming pot ready to burst open at this point. And I think that competitive fire, that chip on the shoulder mentality, it's going to be very interesting to see what Tulane's identity is next season. Are they front runners? Are they underdogs? Are they, led by these new names? Are they led by the legacy of the previous program? But it just makes the idea of spring camp really that much more exciting. And the idea that relationships matter, that what these conversations are that these guys have out of high school with these guys might come in handy a few years later. And so being an authentic person, actually going out of your way to make and form and sustain those connections, it's a long game now. As much as it's short-term gratification in college football, with these guys pointing out the recruitment out of high school, it's something you heard a lot too from a lot of guys that transferred over to Tulane these last couple of years, talking about Willie Fritz recruiting them out of high school. So it is something to keep in mind. And thinking back to John Sumrall's comments on signing day, how they have this new thing going where each coach has a few local high schools that they're assigned to, and that they are to really go there, build, keep those relationships, get to know the coaches, get to know the players. And then when you hear these incoming transfers who have only been on campus for a month and a half at this point, at most, I guess you could really say 2 months if they came in right at the beginning of January, but there's no football that we've had so far. Spring camp hasn't even started yet. And for these guys to both be saying that they feel like the coaches here really care about them past the football field, and that brotherhood and feeling like that is amongst the players was something that drew them to this program. That's something when you talk about legacy, thinking about Nick Anderson, thinking about his comments on choosing to come to Tulane over Ole Miss, and the fact that when he went there, he noticed that it was a little more cliquey and that they were true brothers here at Tulane and really played on and off the field for one another. I just can't underscore the importance of that. And there's going to be programs that I think can get by on acumen and brand name success. You don't necessarily have to be that well-rounded, but I do think when you're looking at what sticks out from one G5 program to another and why is Tulane one of the very few that has now entered what I would consider an elite conversation of contenders is the fact that they really have to be that full, well-rounded program in philosophy, in identity, in from the starters to the depth chart, making sure that everyone has relationships, that they feel heard on the coaching staff, that they feel like this is somewhere where they can come and rejuvenate their careers and their love for the game of football. I think that's more important than anything else. You think again about John Summerall saying that at the end of the day, this is just it's absurd to say that it's a job because it's a game, and it's a game that he loves so much that it never feels like he's working a day in his life. It's sobering to hear a guy that is 22, 23 years old, I'm not entirely sure his exact age, say that he already had the opportunity to fall out of love with the game of football just because of all of the outside pressures of things. The fact that this is somewhere where that's stripped away, but they still feel like this is somewhere that they can come compete, that it doesn't matter that it's not a Power 5 program and that there is a path to the playoffs now. It just opens up the door for really a whole new world for Tulane football. And seeing these guys continue to come in, you've seen a few more that they've added from the transfer portal over these last couple of weeks, and knowing that they're not really done filling out that entire depth chart yet, but you're just so excited about the playmakers and replacing a quarterback. This is going to be my first time looking at that from a college setting. And one of the things that got me into sports writing was I wrote this really long series about replacing Drew Brees and how NFL teams have to really look years in the future to replacing their quarterbacks. So looking at places where, they drafted Patrick Mahomes and had him sit behind Alex Smith for a few years, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, that kind of thing, versus not having someone lying in the wait, throwing someone like Brian Griese in there and having your team kind of flail like the Steelers after Terry Bradshaw and the Bills after Jim Kelly left, and not having a successor literally until Josh Allen. It just goes to show how hard that can be in the NFL. And it's going to be very fascinating watching how that happens in college football, because the transfer portal just makes it such a different story, and you don't have to wait until, this draft and to develop these guys. And you can get guys that have spent a couple years developing in a way, in the same way that you see these guys sitting behind guys like Bo Nix that I don't necessarily have a quarterback evaluation on him, but the competition they had to play against, the critical moments, and going as far as they did in the playoffs, or I'm not sure if they were in the playoffs now. I'm having a complete moment. I'm mixing them up with Washington, but it was that game being out of it. Either way to say, you've seen them learn behind these guys in big moments. And Tulane played its biggest moment of the century against USC, against Mario Williams. And yes, that wasn't the best for him in a critical moment, but I will continue to point this out until I'm blue in the face that USC didn't have a special teams coordinator at the time. And when you talk about and you look at these comments from these guys and feeling again that warmth, and feeling from Mario Williams' perspective like he didn't have the same cultivated relationships with coaches in the past, then you think back to a situation like that, not even having a coach to go over to, but not feeling like you've really bridged that personal gap with your coach. And so how isolating that must have felt for him in that moment. And then you look at a situation for Tulane, for example, where final snap of the regular season in the conference championship game against SMU, Michael Pratt throws to Alex Bauman on 4th down. It's incomplete. Game's over. He was immediately enveloped in Michael Pratt, and the brotherhood took over more than anything else. I've seen now these guys win in the biggest stage and now have some really tough losses. And it's been very well-rounding to see how these guys react after wins, but really more so after losses. That's always been something, the guys that talk after the losses, and not everyone's going to be super effusive. And I appreciate, again, when guys are willing to say that they might be a little bit more of an introverted guy, which was the sense I got from Ty Thompson in his comments about not necessarily being a natural vocal type leader, knowing that's something that he has to go out of his comfort zone in order to do, but that all of this is just so human. And it's really what, again, I continue to try to get at on this show. And I think it really just comes out more on a college level than it does in the NFL, that yes, these are snaps being played by players, but there's just so much that goes into each and every single individual player, that goes into their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and how that all really plays a role in how they do on the football field, but also how they do as men. And does your program not only care about that, but highlight it, if not more so than the success on the field? It just continued to stick out, their perception of this program, their confidence in saying that they're going on to the playoffs, the classiness with which they described their previous situations, and the legacy that they were really able to speak about. I think back to Tyler Grubbs after the spring game last year, where he was talking about the legacy as if he helped build it with Nick Anderson and those guys from the Cotton Bowl. And he's 100% in this legacy now as we move forward into this year and being one of those huge team leaders. But I will never forget turning around to Steve Barrios, our color analyst, and just saying, when's the last time you ever heard someone talk about Tulane like this? And it's just crazy to think that that's not only not a one-off now, but it's just the status quo. And this is something that we're just kind of used to, having these former 4- and 5-star recruit guys speaking about, well, why Tulane, and having so much to say about it. It's certainly a new era of Tulane football, and it's one that makes this spring practice the most excited that I've been to cover this as a sideline reporter, just because I've really been able to see a full life cycle, if you will, of a program and an identity under a coach, under a quarterback. And I know I got away from my comments about replacing a quarterback and that's what I kind of did in the NFL, but looking at how that happens on a college level, and the fact that it's the same thing where you need that kind of fast success, but you have a new coach coming in, trying to build his legacy. He has new quarterbacks coming in, competing for this role, new coaching staff. It's just, there's a lot that I don't think needs to be proven is the right word, but needs to be kind of seen out in order for us to really have any meaningful takeaways. But to have this many meaningful takeaways from two guys that I've never met before, that have never spoke to our media members before, have never spoke about Tulane as a program in public, and don't even have any practices outside of their conditioning workouts to really speak to, the relationship part stuck out more than anything else. And when you look back at how Tulane turned it around from the 2-10 season, it all comes down to human being, and that's the only thing they can really control at the end of the day is their relationships and how they treat one another. That to me is the recipe for success. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product, they're paid to. Well, if you know me at all, then you know two things. One, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And two, if I were in it for the money, well, then I'd certainly be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites, from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials each and every week, one of which I'm going to highlight on today's show. So go check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, located at 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. Speaking of awesome bar specials, who wants a Savannah banana? It's a luxury daiquiri featuring Old Smoky banana pudding cream moonshine, 99 bananas, trying not to sing the song in my head, and spiced rum and vanilla wafer milk. That'll be served in a chocolate swirl glass with whipped cream and an Old Smoky moonshine cherry. And as someone that has tried moonshine fruits, as well as a lot of the concoctions and potions that MJ makes over at Blue Oak Barbecue, this is certainly one, as a banana lover, that I can't wait to try. But why don't y'all go try one and let me know how it goes first. So I'm going to keep it short and sweet for once, as I tend to kind of ramble on these solo episodes. But I just really appreciate the fact that as much football as there is to cover, as much turnover and on the field stuff, looking at schemes, looking at how these new wide receivers are going to turn into playmakers. The fact that Ty Thompson pointed out that he is a runner, and it was kind of just fun to talk with him about, some of the reporters bringing up how we talked to Mike about whether or not he was going to slide out of bounds this week or not. And that might not be something that we as Tulane fans are entirely free from, with Ty Thompson saying that sometimes you just got to let him know and lower his shoulder, but being smart, aggressive. And I think he said that that's how his dad put it. And I really appreciated that he acknowledged that you have to have some smarts about those types of situations, but that he's really not afraid to let him know as long as he's healthy. So adding that caveat as well, but that he's really looking to pass first. As fun as all of that was to break down, I really just enjoyed getting a chance to see these new guys, who they are as people, and how well they already just seem to be those types of Tulane guys, where even if they're a little on the quieter side, you can still tell that there are these takeaways from this program that are getting these big name guys to come over here that might be looking to lick career wounds or those emotional wounds that I don't think are really discussed enough. And the candidness, again, of someone like Ty Thompson in that leadership role at quarterback to come out and kind of admit the fact that he lost his love for the game, and that having to go through the adversity of watching his dream just kind of play out in front of him, that's really what builds your character and builds the type of person that you are. Thinking back to how John Summerall spoke about Ty Thompson as a person and how much he fit the culture and the identity of this Tulane program, it is pretty incredible that this is all a fresh start. These are all people that were not previously in the building 3 months prior, and how bright the future really looks for them. And the fact that everything these guys have built for the last couple of seasons is a selling point for these guys to come over here. But at the end of the day, it only matters how much success you have on the field if you can build relationships and have those go past the snaps, past that at practice. When you look at guys that play until the final snap, that in those critical moments when you're down, when you look at Tulane's mentality in the Cotton Bowl, being down that many points, not that much time left, trusting each other to be able to make this comeback and see the finish line and know that you have what it takes to win. It just continues to really just show how well-rounded of a program Tulane is, and that it's more about the X's and O's are important, but it's a lot more than just the X's and O's, and that matters to guys that are considered the top of this game, and they see that home as Tulane. It's just really an incredible time to be uptown and have some juice.